So I'm here with Helen Spivey, and it's early February of 2013, and we're sitting on the banks of the lovely Withlacoochee River. Maybe even going to see a manatee go by if we're lucky. So Helen, I wanted to find out how you got involved in being associated with manatees. How did they come into your life, and how did you come into theirs?
Well, we made the mistake of moving to Crystal River. And I saw a postcard on a telephone pole, and it said that there was this group, Save the Manatee, collecting information on manatees, viewing if you see one, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife was in cooperation with it. And so I had manatees come in by my house, and I took one home and filled it out, and then I guess we went out in the boat and found one place that was just filled with them, and then I began seeing the scars on their backs. And then we had one, her name was Dihedral, from the dihedral shaped scar on her back.
I see.
And she was hit by a boat at night, and apparently had been sleeping and came up to breathe, and a boat hit her in the head. And they saw her thrashing around out in Kings Bay, and then somebody finally came to rescue her, but she was dead by then. She weighed 3,000 pounds.
Oh, wow.
She was the first, and I guess the last, overeating manatee.
In a while.
You know, the word got out when Fish and Wildlife remarked how big she was, that she was carrying twins, and she wasn't even pregnant. She was just full of it.
So people had been feeding her? Is that what
No, that's when we had a lot of vegetation in the bay, and apparently she was real fond of hydrilla. And then you're looking probably at a manatee that spent a lot of her life there. Some of them just come to visit and move on. And so through my sending in the postcards, then I got something from the new refuge manager, Pat Hagen, and wanted to know if I wanted to help on this. And oh, sure, and away it went.
Now you served as a representative in the Florida legislature at one time, and you've also been involved in the early stages of the Save the Manatee Club. Could you tell us about those activities?
Well, people are always interested to hear that Jimmy Buffett is part of Save the Manatee Club. And we got involved a long time ago. Well, Jimmy Buffett and Bob Graham put together Save the Manatee, and to be where you could get a tax return from giving money to the club. We did not have the proper documentation, so we went under Audubon.
Yeah.
And then that was to last 10 years. And I was fairly active, but not really involved with board members or anything like that. I was volunteer. And so Audubon came in and didn't want us to leave. And so they changed the lock on the door and other things. So we had a picket line, and we were picketing over in Orlando outside of Audubon's headquarters. And this old beat-up car pulls up, and this guy gets out in flip-flops and picks up a picket sign, and it was Jimmy Buffett. And he walked around with us for a while, and then got in his car and left. So you never know who you run into. And we finally settled the friendly settlement of our leaving Audubon, and we had one board member from the Audubon board sit on our board for a while, and that's when I first came on the board. And then I was on Crystal River City Council for 3 terms, and then I got off of there. I was known as the sewer lady. The city wanting to develop the waterfront, and people couldn't pass the perk tests that the health department demanded, sewered all the waterfront, starting back the year I was born, 1928. And they put in a little package plant, and then they had more people and a bigger and a bigger. And of course they're taking all the sewage off the water, treating it, and then dumping the nutrients back in, which helped us grow the biggest crop of hydrilla you've ever seen. So I fought them for years and finally got the sewer taken out, but I got the reputation of being known as the sewer lady.
Now, you know, you must have seen changes in sort of the public's attitude about a variety of environmental issues over the years, including manatees. Can you give us a feeling from your perspective how things have changed from, say, the late 70s, early 80s to now, 2013? What's your perspective on that?
I think they've changed a good deal. For Save the Manatee, we had a slideshow, and I would go to schools and go to colleges, and the one that really stands out in my mind is this college course that I went and spoke to the students. And the boys are saying, well, we go out there, excuse me, we go out there every weekend and we ride them. They're not bleeding when we get off.
They ride.
I mean, what's wrong with that? It's a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've gone from that. I don't know if I ever convinced them other than they could be heavily fined if they were caught doing that. And I think they thought more of their beer money than putting it into a fine and having to go to Jacksonville. And working as a volunteer at the Manatee Festival, and then there's a couple of other places, one down in Weeki Wachee, that we go to. The change over the years in the interest of people in manatees has just been tremendous. I understand the politics of the population. I mean, we have so many voters who work very hard, and they come home and they strip down, get a beer, turn on the TV, and wait for supper. And that goes back to the days of Harry Truman. Mm-hmm. I saw him in an interview, and he was president, and it was before we have all this heavy security and everything. He was giving a speech in LA, and he wanted to see the city. So he took the car and went driving around. Well, it got close to the time he was supposed to show up to give his speech, and he was lost. So he stopped at this housing development and goes up and knocks on the door, and he said this guy came out, undershirt, shorts, and a beer in his hand, and he says, "My granny, did anybody ever tell you look like that son of a bitch Harry Truman?" And Truman says, "I told him I am that son of a bitch Harry Truman, and I'm glad to meet you." And he says, "I think the fellow will go and vote for me."
Right.
And you have to go with the flow.
Helen, I would like you to tell our audience how the things that you've done with regard to, on behalf of the environment and with regard to efforts to help manatees out, can you give us a feeling for how this relates to sort of what you might call your life values, your sense of how this is going to make the world a better place, and kind of what motivates you to keep persisting in the face of all these challenges?
Well, I always weigh something as, is this the right thing to do? That's my mantra. And I started years ago. I spent 35 years in Girl Scouting, and I had several Girl Scout troops, and one I took all the way from brownies to senior scouts to graduates, and I was in an art show here at the Yankeetown Seafood Festival, well, maybe 10 years ago, and this gal came up to me and she said, "Mrs. Spivey," and I looked and there's Teresa, and she was a Girl Scout leader.
Uh-huh. Oh, as an adult.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she had grown up in my troop, and she became a Girl Scout leader.
Wow.
And it just, if you set the right example, and don't, always try not to preach to people, but you do by example, and it just, that paid off big time. It was just really, really nice. I have had people disrespect me. I've been run off the road. I've had my car scratched. I've had my tires punctured. But there's always people there to help. I had both my front tires punctured at a hearing I had gone to from the county to try and stop this one development in wetlands. And when I came out, it was like 10 o'clock at night, and here's both my front tires flat. And the car parked next to me had 2 off-duty deputies.
Oh.
And they jacked it up and shot the repair stuff in the holes, and
Nice.
yeah, in your darkest moments, you'll find that there are people who really care. But I also think we have to let them know how to care. And that's what I try and do with Save the Manatee. Used to give all the talks to the schools, and got adults involved that way, got school children involved that way, and some of them have gone on to go into marine biology. The field is getting so interesting that I think it's really appealing to young people. It's no longer dirty samples of water.
Now, you've lived in this area for some time, around Crystal River and Yankeetown. What about the locals? What about the attitudes of the locals? Of course, this is an area where many people try to make a living from the food resources in the water, the fishing and so forth. And so having to go slow in your boat impacts and has impacted their way of doing business. Can you comment on how you've seen attitudes change or stay the same over, say, the last 30 years or so, during which time these slow speed zones have proliferated?
Well, when we first tried to get slow speed in the bay, in Kings Bay itself, we had fishing guides come and pitch fits, and I'll lose all my customers by the time I get over to the plantation, and you know, it's forever, and so I would always say, well, you know, just think of the beauty around that they get to look at. It's not like you're going through a tunnel.
Right.
So we finally got that passed, and I think at the time we had 7 fishing guides, and within 2 years we had 15.
Yeah.
So they got to see it work, and it didn't interfere with them, and it was really.
So do you find that, you know, their attitude then changed as a result?
Yeah. They still don't want everybody out there fishing, and I think that maybe someday if it gets bad enough, but the fishing has gone down because of the quality of the water, and we're having either sea level rise or too much sucking from inland, bringing salt water in, but it is, and the mullet population is finally recovering, but they can't net them. They can't dynamite them. That was the first thing they lost.
Yeah.
But it seems to be adjusting. I had one sort of enemy for years and years and years who was a realtor in Crystal River. And he came up to me one day and he said, you know that property I have over there with the single houses and every house has a dock? He said, I now like manatees. He said, I had this couple looking at this house. He said, it's the last one I'm going to sell. And he said, they went down to look from the dock, and here was a mother and a calf, a manatee, and they fell in love and signed the papers that day. So it works.
You've been around these issues for some time and seen a lot of people come and go, and a lot of things change and then come back to the same. For a young person out there that, you know, has a passion for the water, maybe they're a snorkeler, maybe they've swum with manatees, or they're passionate about environmental issues generally, water quality, whatever it might be, and they're wondering how they can pursue this in a more serious way. What sort of advice would you have for a young person like that?
Well, it depends on where they start out. Hopefully we can get them starting out in grammar school. And there are, like Save the Manatee Club program, if a child in a classroom adopts a manatee for that class, the teacher gets an education booklet. Mm-hmm. And then she uses that to teach her students about manatees. I have never met a young child, a grammar school child, who didn't really like manatees and never wanted to go out and ride one like the college kids did at that time. And I think that has kind of left. But it's education, which to a kid is
more school.
But there's so many ways of learning about things. You've got Google on the internet, but we've got to pose the question to them. I've worked with young people, like my gal in the Scouts, who came back, and not only she was a leader, she said 2 more of my Scouts were leaders.
Good.
So setting the example and not necessarily going with the program, because they've expanded on it in many different ways, is one way of doing it, but getting kids interested in the right way. I unfortunately met a school teacher one time who said she came to Crystal River every year, brought her class, and it was always the same dive shop, and she said they're so nice. They go out, they buy boxes of lettuce and feed the manatees. the next day when the children are there. So an awful lot depends on educating the businesses and particularly in such a way that you don't want to take this person out on a trip where they'll come back and want to take your job away from you, but you want to get them dedicated to the animal. You want to get them to want to protect it, to want to conserve it. The webcam that we have now at Blue Springs, I think it was yesterday, it's a manatee named, I think it's Casa or Cosa, had a calf. And it's a little fella, and real dark colored, and they've got these great photos. It's on the mama's back and underneath, and I know a photographer that had a picture of manatees, and it's another good place to go. Homosassa Springs State Wildlife Park, they run a good educational program. And back when we had male and female and had pregnant manatees and manatee births in there, there was this one manatee that had this adorable little calf, and she was trying to sleep on the bottom, and the calf didn't want to. The calf wanted to play and come nudge her, and she waited till it swam around behind her and whammed it with her tail.
Oh boy.
And he came up on her back, put his little fins like that, and lay down on top of her. That was the cutest series of photographs you have ever seen. Oh, Mama, I'll be good.
I'll be good, yeah.
But they also need time when they're newborn to to come up and breathe. They have to, apparently something like that isn't necessarily inborn in them. At the park, in watching them, we had to put patrols out of certain, you'd take 5 hours and you're watching this newborn calf and to make sure it's coming up to breathe, because sometimes the mother would be young.
Would forget to nudge it up.
Yeah, yeah. And it just, things like that make it alive and something that you know how to protect, but because it's the vast world out there, you've got to show other people what you know. And I think that's what you're doing with this program.
Well, I hope so. So is there, for the last little bit here, is there anything we haven't covered that you would like to say?
No, I think you fall in love with manatees. They're adorable when they're little. When they're big, they're probably only their children could love them. But it's something that you have to know what's the right thing to do. You have to care what's the right thing to do. And for a child to fall in love with a little manatee, and then you have to expand the world to the little manatee's world and the wetlands and the water and the springs and how they all fit in together, and it makes it just a wonderful experience.